a multi-instrumentalist. You also do composing for like theater and ballet productions even.
I did for Frankfurt Ballet, but I should clarify that and say that, I think I'm still just entering at the very, 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 very entering, maybe outside the entering position of composing. And really, like, a lot of the dance things I've done have been improvising for the dance and less composing for the dance. And so I feel like that is a difference where you sit down and in a premeditated way you're holding some paper or the computer and you're writing things down, and then you're listening, writing, and then you get a group together and they're all reading your work. In my case, I was typically improvising scores for dance and for theater, which is, I think, a different sort of tradition.
So you would play it with the artists?
Yeah, that's right.
On stage? Or
yeah, exactly. So it would be live usually.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And would the happening on stage, would it also change significantly?
Definitely, it would absolutely affect, and that's what I think is actually profoundly beautiful. I mean,
human tripod.
well, I don't think we should be too critical of the composition situation in this moment, because I was starting to imagine, well, improvising has a strong benefit to it because it can take in the energy of who you're collaborating with. It can take in the energy of the space, of the audience that evening, and therefore make music that is really alive in that moment.
Yeah.
And I want to imagine in a way that maybe composition cannot. But if you have very good interpreters, they can very subtly shift the small aspects of something that's written so that it speaks to the energy of the room at that moment.
If you take most of the work you do as a performer on stage, like all the bands, what would be like the approximate ratio of how much is written and rehearsed versus how much is improvised? Because in Ceramic Dog you would have songs and lyrics.
It's interesting. Even relative to this band, it's been an interesting journey because I feel like in the beginning there was maybe more improvisation than there is currently, where it's a little bit more written. And along the trajectory and history of the band, maybe that went up and down in a gentle way where it would be a bit more improvised, a bit more written, a bit more improvised. But I'd say if I was to guess the percentage at the moment, maybe in terms of what I'm physically playing on the bass, probably 80% written, 20% improvised.
Okay.
At this moment, at least with this group tonight.
With this group, okay.
Yeah.
But like, and then generally, if you take all the instruments, like the last couple of months.
Probably generally, I tend to do a lot more improvising and non-composed things. Although I play a lot with songwriters, and for example, if I play a show with Sam Amidon, his parts are very, very strict, like his singing and his banjo part, his guitar part, that's all pre-written. But he allows me to play in whatever way I feel like. So it's hard to say what one should consider that to be, because you are working within a form, and you are clear that the downbeat's going to fall here, and that the section's going to end here. But within those pillars, I'm completely deciding whatever I might want to do. For example, on one evening, it would be totally fine if I just played a quiet, soft snare drum roll for the entire verse. And then on the chorus, just played one cymbal one time. And that would be okay. And on the next evening, I might play like a full beat on the verse and a full beat on the chorus, and that would be fine. So in a way, I'm improvising quite strongly.
How have you arrived at the place where you're at right now artistically, and what was your journey?
Okay, well, if I'm going to be really blunt with you, which maybe is useful in an interview, I am currently in a sort of bottom space where everything is quite sad and is really uncomfortable. And I think the way I arrived there right now is I didn't happen to tend a garden very well. Like when if you imagine maybe this as a analogy, let's say you're a young person and you're given a lot of opportunity, plenty of seeds and plants and beautiful plot of grass and excellent topsoil, and then it's up to you how you're going to tend your garden.
Yeah.
And in my case, I think I sowed a garden of very twisted, dark, ugly, non-fruit-bearing trees and plants.
Okay.
And then 20 plus years later, that is the garden that I'm surrounded by. So now I have to think, okay, do I have the courage and bravery to do something about that? Or should I just sit down and think, okay, well, I'm already old. This is it. Let's just sit with this now. So I'm trying really hard to not take the latter point of view, in terms of a musician, in terms of a person, in terms of a friend. And so I'm imagining that I can reestablish things, cut some things down, replant some other things, see if I can make things work again.
And as the plants in the metaphor, do you refer to them as like elements of your musical language, or? Like...
I would refer to them as all of my relationships with people, and my relationship to instruments, and my relationship to myself. That's probably what they would be a metaphor for. Yeah. Okay. And so, for example, let's say I think about playing music, right? I'm currently in a situation where it's a weird moment because I learned to play my instruments in a very fortunate way, which was by playing lots and lots of gigs all the time. So on any given day, I might have one concert or two concerts, two rehearsals, and then a bit of recording work. And that was pretty much 7 days a week, every week, many years in a row. And so I never really needed to have a practice where I put on a metronome and I was by myself going ding dong ding dong, because I was playing all the time among people. And I feel like that's actually a very beautiful way to learn your instrument, because in fact there are some cultures like Bali where it doesn't make sense to them that you would ever play your instrument by yourself, because the instrument, playing music itself, is a fabric of social interaction. Yeah. And also literal musical interaction. So the idea that you would play your part like dun 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 alone ever, just, it's conceptually unusual and wouldn't make sense to a person there. So if you did want to practice your drum part, you would call up your friend and get most of the rest of the group together and then practice your drum part. You know, you wouldn't do it by yourself. And so, but what I mean to say is now, a lot of, that's not the way I work. I'm not playing all the time every day. And so I'm trying to imagine, how do I have a deep relationship to the instrument again? Do I get a metronome and start practicing alone and have a daily practice routine? What I was just telling Chess the other day on the plane was I was thinking about calling up people who are very serious players and trying to find out what is the difficult music they're trying to learn right now. And then I would offer to them, if they would send me the PDF of the music, I would learn it, and hopefully it would be very difficult. And then I would just ask if I could go to their house tomorrow for an hour during the daytime, and we would just sit down and practice the music together.
The same part.
The thing that they were interested. Let's say I call up my friend. I was thinking a lot about Mary Halverson actually, because we played a duo gig recently and it was really fun. I was thinking, and I know that she practices, like she's one of those people that, as far as I understand, has a daytime practice thing alone, metronome, like doing her thing. So I thought I'd ask her, like, what's some hard music, or what is she really into at the moment, and then I would learn it a bit, and then we'd go over and hang out together. So then it'd be back into that social way of playing your instrument. And so there's always the feedback of not just your own hearing or your own hearing against the metronome, but there's also the feedback of when you place a note, how it relates to the person sitting across from you, what their choices are.
Okay. How did you get started in music now?
I wanted to be a musician ever since I could remember, like as small as possible. I remember being deeply, deeply, deeply moved by music somehow. And it's very weird to me because nobody in my family played, and I don't understand what took place. We didn't listen to music. There was no home stereo. There were no records. There were no going to see concerts. There's none of that, zero. There's no interest in music, film, art, books, theater, museums, nothing. And in fact, one time I read a book that a friend of mine had laying around by an author named Somerset Maugham, British author, and he was describing in this particular book, a young boy loses his parents, goes to a parish is raised by a local priest that's grandfather age, like 2 generations above. And the priest and his wife and the kid have these meals together. And the meal is just dust falling everywhere, no one talking, super gray, and then they cut one egg into 3 sections, and then they quietly hand the egg to everybody, and then everyone quietly eats. No one says anything. It's extremely depressing. More dust is falling. Then there's more dust. And then they just put their head on the table. And that's basically what a lot of what my childhood was like in terms of where it was coming from. So it's completely arcane to me to imagine how I even got here. I mean, whenever I interact with my family, so I have a memory of life starting, I just think it's completely amazing that I'm standing here, because I feel like in my imagination, other musicians, other artists had the benefit of growing up in New York City, or having parents that were artists, or having parents that were in the theater, and so they interacted with ideas and aesthetics all through their life.
Yeah.
But I was starting in just like the quietest, most gray, just dust.
Was that in Arizona?
It was in Pennsylvania.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So then I was trying to think of like how this happened. And one time I went to Iceland, and I spoke to a woman who speaks to the dead. And so she said, "You had a brother," and that was really interesting to me because I didn't say anything. When I was 2 years old, I had a brother for 7 days. He was born, and then he was missing the wall between his blue blood and red blood in his heart. Which so he would breathe in air and it would oxygenate the blood, but it would get mixed with oxygenated blood, and he couldn't survive. So he died. And I'd always sort of thought of myself as an only child, because when you're 2 and you have like someone for just 7 days and then you have the rest of your life, you sort of imagine it's just me and my parents. And then she said, "Oh, you had a brother, and actually he was a musician, and he didn't continue to survive, so that's why you're a musician, because he's inside you." And the way she said it was so matter of fact and so like slamming the gavel down is really interesting.
Wow.
That could be the answer to that situation. Especially if somehow it started at 2 would be interesting if it actually was a spirit inhabitation.
What was your first instrument then?
First instrument I could think of playing was I was in the early school bands, kind of like 6th grade, which would mean I would be about 11 or something.
Okay.
And so because I was coming from a place where I didn't play, I didn't have any training, I was given the most simple drum instrument, which was the bass drum.
Yeah.
But what I'm grateful for was that was already when they would have 4 bass drums, and they would have to play interlocking melodies. So it'd be like doom, ding, ding, dun, doom, dum, doom, dun. So you were already playing and imagining things in an interactive fashion. Because if you imagine like the snare drum part, in some cases, the snare drum part was just floating over top of everything. Yeah. So the person could just memorize their part and just play it and not have to listen too strongly. Yeah. But as the bass drum player, you had to listen for when that beat was falling so that you would play yours in the right timing relative to that. So it feels nice that it already started with a collaborative, communicative position.
What was your first self-organized band, I guess, with your peers?
Probably I was in college, and I went to college a little bit on the younger side, so I was around 16 or 17, and there was a singer.
Yeah.
He had bipolar disorder and also was dyslexic, so he couldn't learn the guitar, so he just played noise guitar, because he could never remember where any note or chord was, and he wrote amazing lyrics, and I was the bass player, and then there was a drummer. So what was already interesting about that was that since that particular guitar wasn't going to give any chords or any harmonic information, my position as the bass player was to do all of it. Almost more like a piano player. Like I would play as much of the melody and harmony as possible so that he could just do noise events and sing, and then the drummer would play. That was the trio that was in for a while.
Wow.
And it had a ridiculous name. It's called the Sub-Zero Picklemen, based on the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So
that's amazing.
That was the situation, yeah. And you know what? Ironically, we went to New York City to record that cassette tape, which now, thinking about it, is so amazing because I wanted to live in that city ever since I was a kid. I didn't get there really until I was 28, but for this one brief moment, we left the school, drove to New York City, recorded this cassette tape, then drove back to the school. And that was really the only time I interacted with New York.
Just for the sake of
later.
getting into the studio.
Yeah, exactly, because there wasn't a studio where we were
Yeah.
going to school or something. Yeah. And I think probably we might be getting close to stopping, sadly, because we have to get ready soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Oh man, thanks you guys.